He was not like other children in his school. Quiet, small, and often overlooked, he usually kept to himself. While other kids played games, laughed loudly, and ran around, he would sit quietly in the corner of the classroom or the schoolyard. People often called him shy, but it was not shyness that kept him quiet, it was something else. Something that others could not see yet. His fascination was with the piano. Not many in his neighborhood had pianos, and he had never had lessons before. But every time he saw one, whether in a music shop or at a friend's house, he felt drawn to it. There was something magical about the black and white keys. They promised stories, emotions, and worlds far bigger than the small streets he lived on. One afternoon, the school organized a small cultural event. There was an old, slightly worn piano in the auditorium. Nobody paid much attention to it. To everyone, it was just a piece of furniture. But when he walked in, his eyes lit up. Something deep inside him told him to touch it. He walked slowly, his small hands trembling slightly, and placed them on the keys. The first notes he played were awkward. They were uneven, uncoordinated, and a little off. They did not sound like music at all, at least not the kind that anyone else would recognize. The sound seemed clumsy, almost funny, and immediately a group of children started giggling. "Look at him! He's hitting the keys like he's scared." One boy laughed. "Does he even know what a piano is?" Another whispered. The whispers spread, and soon a circle formed around him. Everyone laughed openly, pointing fingers. He felt his face grow hot. Embarrassment burned him inside, but he did not stop. His small fingers continued moving over the keys, trying to create something beautiful. But the laughter grew louder. Even some of the teachers shook their heads. They did not understand why he was trying so hard when it was obvious he was struggling. A few of them murmured that maybe he should focus on studies instead of wasting time on music. Yet, beneath the awkward notes and the trembling hands, something strange was happening. His fingers seemed to remember shapes and patterns, and a tiny melody began to form. It was faint, almost hidden beneath the noise of laughter, but it was there. And he could feel it. After what felt like hours, though in reality it was only a few minutes, he stepped back. The room was silent for a moment, not because anyone was impressed, but because he had stopped, leaving only the faint echo of the notes behind. Then the laughter returned, even louder than before. "Ha! That's it? That's the song?" Someone shouted. "You call that music?" Another said. He lowered his head, feeling a mix of shame and frustration. He wanted to run, to hide, to never go near the piano again. But there was a small voice inside him, one that refused to be silenced. It whispered, "You can do this. You just need to keep trying." That night, after the laughter had faded and the school was quiet, he sneaked back to the piano. The janitor had left the auditorium unlocked. He sat down alone, his heart pounding, and touched the keys again. This time there was no audience, no mocking voices, only him and the piano. The first notes he played were still shaky, but he did not care. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move, feeling the rhythm in his mind. Slowly, the awkwardness faded. He started experimenting, pressing different keys together, creating small tunes that made him smile. He felt joy with every sound, every chord, every little melody that came alive beneath his fingers. Days turned into weeks. Every spare moment he could find, he returned to the piano. At first, it was a secret. He did not tell anyone, not his family, not the teachers, and certainly not the classmates who had mocked him. He practiced quietly, learning by listening to himself. Feeling the music in a way that no one else could see, his hands grew stronger, more confident. Notes that once sounded wrong now flowed smoothly. Simple songs became more complex. Slowly, patterns emerged and a natural rhythm began to take shape. It was as if the piano and he had become friends, understanding each other without words, yet outside the walls of the auditorium, life continued as usual. The same children who had laughed at him still mocked him in the playground. Some called him the piano fool, while others ignored him completely. Every insult stung, but it also made him more determined. Each time someone laughed, he made a silent promise to himself. One day they would see. One day they would understand. His family noticed the change in him. He spent hours drawing invisible music in the air with his fingers, humming melodies quietly under his breath, and even sketching notes on paper when he could not reach a piano. They were puzzled at first. "Why do you spend so much time alone?" they asked. He would only smile softly and say, "Unlearning." The more he practiced, the more his confidence grew. Not the loud, proud confidence that demanded attention, but a quiet, steady belief that he could create something beautiful if he tried. He learned patience. He learned discipline. And most importantly, he learned to believe in himself when no one else did. There were nights when he almost gave up. Sometimes the keys would feel heavy, his fingers stiff, and the melodies impossible. Sometimes the laughter of his classmates echoed in his mind, making him question why he even tried. But each time he returned to the piano, reminding himself that music was more than applause or recognition. It was a language of the heart that by the end of the first year, something remarkable had begun to show. Those who noticed him occasionally saw that his fingers moved with a grace that was unusual for someone his age. Even though he was still shy, there was a spark in his eyes whenever he touched the keys, a light that spoke of hidden talent. One afternoon, a music teacher happened to walk past the auditorium and heard him playing. At first, she thought it was just beginner practice. But soon, she realized that what she was hearing was beyond ordinary. The notes were hesitant in parts, yes, but the melodies hinted at something extraordinary. She stopped in her tracks, listening quietly, amazed at the potential in this quiet boy who had been mocked so much. That moment marked the beginning of something new. Though he did not yet know it, his life was about to change. The mocking laughter, the whispered insults, the feelings of embarrassment, they would all become part of the story that shaped him. The story that would one day surprise everyone who had ever doubted him. For now, he returned home that evening with tired fingers but a joyful heart. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be more laughter, more doubt, more challenges. But he also knew something very important. Inside him, there was music, and it was waiting to shine. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the faint hum of the city outside his window, he imagined a future where people would stop laughing and start listening. A future where his music could speak louder than words, louder than ridicule, louder than fear. And with that thought he drifted to sleep, dreaming of melodies that had not yet been played, stories that had not yet been told, and the moment when the world would finally hear him. And so, the quiet boy who had been mocked, laughed at, and underestimated began his journey not just to play the piano, but to transform every sneer, every doubt, and every laugh into something beautiful, powerful, and unforgettable. After the first year, the quiet boy's connection with the piano grew stronger every day. What had begun as awkward, stumbling notes slowly became music that he could feel with every part of himself. But this part of his life remained mostly hidden. No one at school realized how much time he spent alone, practicing, learning, and discovering what his fingers could do. He would arrive early in the morning before the school doors opened, slipping quietly into the auditorium. The old piano stood in its usual place, waiting patiently. He would sit down, take a deep breath, and let his hands wander over the keys. Sometimes he played familiar tunes that he had heard on the radio or at home. Other times, he closed his eyes and created his own music, melodies that nobody had ever heard before. These were his secret treasures, his private world where nothing else mattered. At first, he still made mistakes. Fingers stumbled, rhythms faltered, and sometimes a note would sound sharp or flat. But he did not let frustration stop him. Instead, he would play the same piece again and again, listening carefully, correcting, adjusting, and learning. Slowly, he began to understand the language of music. Not just as a sequence of notes, but as a way to express feelings that words could never reach. One afternoon, while he was practicing, the school music teacher returned to the auditorium. She had heard him once before and could not forget the potential she sensed in him. Today, she wanted to listen again, quietly, without disturbing him. She stood at the back, leaning against the wall, and watched him play. At first, his hands moved nervously as he noticed someone was there. But then he realized it was the teacher, and something in him relaxed. He played more freely, letting his feelings guide his fingers. The music was no longer just notes. It was emotion. It was joy, sadness, curiosity, and longing all at once. The teacher's eyes widened. She had never seen such raw talent in a child so young, and she knew immediately that this boy could go far if someone guided him properly. After he finished, the teacher approached him gently. "You have a gift," she said softly. "Do you know that?" He shook his head, surprised. No one had ever called him gifted. Most people had laughed at him. The idea that he might have a talent was new and frightening, but also exciting. I just play," he said quietly. "And you play beautifully," she replied. "But if you want, I can help you learn more. I can show you things that will make your music even stronger." For the first time, someone believed in him completely. Someone saw the music in him, not the awkwardness or the mistakes. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. From that day, the boy started practicing differently. He still played in secret sometimes, but now he had guidance. The teacher showed him how to position his hands correctly, how to read notes more easily, and how to control the rhythm and tempo. She introduced him to new songs, some simple, some complex, and encouraged him to create his own compositions. Each lesson was a new adventure, and with every passing day, his confidence grew. Outside the auditorium, life remained the same. The children who had laughed at him still mocked him, and sometimes their words reached his ears. "Piano fool," they called him. "Does he even know what music is?" But these words no longer hurt as much. Inside, he was learning something far more important. He was discovering that his worth was not measured by the laughter of others. At home, he would often hum the melodies he had learned or imagined. Sometimes he scribbled notes on paper, not to show anyone, but to remember the songs he had created. His parents noticed his growing focus and quiet determination. They could see the joy music brought him, and though they did not fully understand it, they supported him. A small corner of their living room became his practice space. And even if it was just a few minutes each day, it gave him a place to let his imagination flow freely. As months passed, the boy began experimenting more boldly. He tried new rhythms, new combinations of keys, and even different styles of music. He made mistakes, of course, sometimes very noticeable ones, but he learned from every error. Each mistake became a lesson, each lesson a step closer to mastery. There were moments of loneliness too. Practicing for hours alone could be tiring, and sometimes he wondered if anyone would ever care about the music he created. But each time he reminded himself why he loved the piano. It was not about praise or recognition. It was about the feeling of creating something beautiful, something that came entirely from him. One day, during another secret practice session, the boy discovered something amazing. He found that he could take two very different melodies and combine them into one song. At first it sounded chaotic, but slowly he shaped it, finding harmony and rhythm in the clash of notes. It was a small breakthrough, but for him it was a huge moment. He realized that music could be more than just playing someone else's songs, it could be his own voice. Meanwhile, at school, small whispers began to change. Some students noticed that the boy spent a lot of time near the piano. A few curious ones asked him why he liked it so much. He rarely spoke about it, but sometimes when he smiled quietly, they sensed there was more to him than they had thought. The mocking laughter had not disappeared, but it had less power over him now. The teacher continued to nurture his talent, giving him challenges that pushed him to grow. She encouraged him to perform small pieces for her, just the two of them. Each performance was better than the last. His timing improved, his confidence grew, and the music became more expressive. She also taught him the importance of patience. "Sometimes," she said, "the most beautiful music comes from waiting, listening, and feeling. Rushing will never create true art." The boy listened carefully, taking her words to heart. He realized that music was not just pressing keys, it was understanding, feeling, and connecting with something bigger than himself. With each practice session, he felt that connection growing stronger. One afternoon, the teacher asked him to play a piece he had never tried before. It was difficult, with fast sequences of notes and complex rhythms. The boy hesitated, feeling nervous, but he agreed. At first, his fingers stumbled. The notes sounded messy and he felt frustrated. But he remembered the words of his teacher, took a deep breath, and tried again. Slowly, slowly, he began to play correctly. Each mistake became smaller, each note clearer. By the end of the practice, he had mastered the piece. The smile on his face was worth more than any applause. Over time, his secret practice began to pay off. His fingers moved with speed and precision, his melodies flowed naturally, and even when he tried new things, the music always sounded right. He was no longer just the boy who had been laughed at. He was becoming someone capable of creating something truly remarkable, but despite his progress, he remained humble. He did not brag or boast about his talent. He knew that music was personal, something to share with care and purpose. For him, the real joy was in the act of creating, not in the recognition he might someday receive. Even though the boy had discovered his hidden talent, the world around him had not yet realized it. His classmates still laughed, still mocked, and still underestimated him. But he no longer cared in the same way. He had something they could not take away, the growing mastery of his music and the quiet, steady belief that one day it would matter God at night when he returned home. He would sit by the window and imagine the future. He dreamed of playing in front of people who would listen, of composing songs that could touch hearts, and of showing the world that the quiet, mocked boy could create beauty beyond their imagination. The dreams kept him motivated, kept him practicing, and kept the small fire inside him alive. And so, day after day, he continued. The mocking voices faded into the background, replaced by the sound of his own music, the sound of progress and the sound of hope. Every note he played, every melody he created, was a step towards something bigger than himself. Little did anyone know. The boy who had been mocked so mercilessly was preparing for a moment that would change everything. The laughter, the whispers, the doubt, they were all shaping him, giving him strength, and preparing him for the day when his music would finally speak louder than words. He was no longer just a boy struggling to play a piano. He was becoming a musician in the truest sense, a young artist who had discovered the power of perseverance, practice, and the magic that comes when someone refuses to give up on their dreams. The announcement came on a Monday morning. The school principal stood in front of the assembly, smiling broadly, as the students whispered excitedly among themselves. "This year, we will have a talent show," the principal said. "Everyone is encouraged to participate. Sing, dance, play an instrument, show us what you can do." Immediately, a wave of excitement ran through the students. Some shouted, some clapped, some whispered to friends about what they would perform. The atmosphere was electric, full of energy and anticipation. The quiet boy, sitting near the back, felt a flutter of nervousness in his chest. His heart raced as he thought about the piano. He had practiced in secret for months, learning more than anyone could imagine. But performing in front of the whole school was completely different. The thought of being watched, judged, and laughed at again made him anxious. Meanwhile, his classmates were quick to notice him. Some snickered and whispered as if daring him to join. "Hey, maybe the piano fool will try again?" one boy laughed. "Yeah, let's see if he messes up like last year," another whispered. The boy felt the sting of those words. But he also felt a quiet determination building inside him. All those hours spent practicing, all the secret melodies he had created had led to this moment. He could either hide, like he always had, or he could finally show what he could do. After school, he returned to the auditorium. The old piano stood in the corner, waiting silently, like an old friend. He placed his hands on the keys and let the music flow. This time, he did not play timidly or carelessly. Every note was deliberate, every melody purposeful. The piano seemed to respond to him, as if it knew that something important was about to happen. He spent the next few days preparing his performance. He practiced every morning before classes and every evening after school. He memorized every note, perfected every chord, and imagined the way the music would feel when played in front of an audience. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. It became fuel, pushing him to work harder and focus more than ever before. As the talent show day approached, the whispers and jokes from other students grew louder. Some teased him openly in the hallways. "Don't forget your piano fool act." One boy shouted as he passed by, "Try not to make everyone cry." "From laughter this time," another added. Some of the girls giggled, covering their mouths as if they were afraid of hurting his feelings too much. But the boy no longer let these words affect him. He had learned to shut out the negativity. All that mattered was the music, and the music was ready to speak for him. Finally, the day arrived. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and a few parents. The stage looked bigger than he remembered, and the bright lights made it seem even more intimidating. He took a deep breath, feeling his palms grow sweaty. The piano sat at the center, its black and white keys gleaming under the lights. One by one, students performed. Some sang, some danced, some played instruments, and each performance drew applause. The crowd was lively, cheering for every act. The boy watched from the side, waiting for his turn, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. When his name was finally called, a hush fell over the auditorium. Everyone turned to look at him. He walked slowly to the stage, his small frame dwarfed by the bright lights. Some students whispered and laughed quietly, expecting him to fail, expecting the same awkward performance they had seen months ago. He approached the piano, his hands hovering over the keys for a moment. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered every hour of practice, every melody he had imagined, every secret moment he had spent perfecting his music. This was the moment to show the world what he could do. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. Some in the audience smiled, thinking this might be another clumsy attempt. But then, slowly, the music began to flow. The notes became clear and precise, forming a melody that was both delicate and powerful. It was unlike anything the school had ever heard. As he played, the audience fell silent. The laughter, the whispers, the mocking all disappeared. All that remained was the music. His fingers danced across the keys with confidence and grace, weaving emotions into every note. Joy, sadness, hope, and determination all came alive through the melody. Some students leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. Teachers exchanged amazed glances. Even those who had teased him before could not look away. The awkward boy they had laughed at months ago had transformed into a musician whose talent was undeniable. With every chord, the music grew stronger, more expressive. He played with feeling, not just skill. It was clear that he was not just repeating notes he had learned. He was creating, improvising, and telling a story through the piano. The auditorium felt alive with the emotion he poured into every sound. By the time he reached the final notes, the silence in the room was almost unbearable. Then, as the last note faded, the audience erupted into applause. Cheering, clapping, and even a few tears filled the room. People were standing, not out of politeness, but because they had witnessed something extraordinary. He opened his eyes, slightly overwhelmed by the response. The faces in the crowd were no longer mocking. They were amazed, inspired, and grateful to have heard such beautiful music. The boy smiled quietly, feeling a mix of relief and joy. He had done it. He had faced the fear, ignored the laughter, and let his talent shine. After the performance, teachers approached him with praise. The music teacher who had guided him smiled warmly. "I knew you could do it," she said. "You have something special, something that goes beyond just talent. You have heart, and that makes all the difference." Even some of the students who had mocked him came forward, their faces showing respect for the first time. I didn't know you could play like that," one boy admitted quietly. "Yeah, that was amazing," another added. The boy nodded, not needing to say much. The music had spoken for him. His talent, which had been hidden and underestimated for so long, had finally been seen and heard by everyone. That day marked a turning point. The boy who had been mocked, ignored, and laughed at had transformed the way people saw him. He was no longer the awkward, shy child in the corner. He was a musician, a storyteller, and a young artist with a gift that could touch hearts. Yet, despite the praise, he remained humble. He did not boast or show off. He knew that the music itself was the reward. The applause was wonderful, but it was the connection he felt with the piano, the joy of creating something meaningful, that mattered most. After the show, He returned to the piano in the auditorium one last time that day. He played softly, letting the music flow for himself, not for an audience. The notes were gentle, reflective, full of gratitude and hope. He knew this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more performances, and more obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that he had taken the first step toward a future where his talent would never be doubted again. And so, the boy walked home that evening with a quiet smile on his face. The laughter from the past was gone, replaced by the memory of a moment when he had proven to himself, more than anyone else, that he was capable of greatness. Every step he took felt lighter, every breath fuller, and every thought focused on the melodies that would continue to flow from his heart. And his hands, he had faced the fear of being judged, the weight of ridicule, and the anxiety of performing in front of everyone. And he had succeeded, not just in playing the piano, but in showing courage, perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. That night as he lay in bed, he thought of the performance again. The faces of the audience, the sound of applause, and the feeling of the music flowing through him filled his mind. He realized that this was what he had been working toward all along, not just recognition, but the joy of sharing something beautiful with the world. He closed his eyes, imagining new melodies, new songs, and new performances. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he truly believed that anything was possible. The boy who had been mocked, laughed at, and underestimated had taken his first big step toward a life filled with music. Passion and the promise of something extraordinary and deep inside. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the piano would always be there, his friend, his teacher, and the voice through which he could speak when words were not enough. The day after the talent show, the school was buzzing with excitement. Students whispered in the hallways, teachers chatted in the staff room, and even parents who had attended the show couldn't stop talking about the quiet boy who had stunned everyone with his piano. His name was on everyone's lips, but the boy himself remained calm, carrying himself with the same quiet humility he always had. Yet inside he felt a mix of emotions. Pride, yes, but also nervousness. The applause and attention from yesterday were new to him, and he was not used to being in the spotlight. He loved music, but he had always thought of it as something private, something just for him. Now, it seemed that everyone wanted to see more, and that idea made his heart race. The music teacher who had mentored him approached him that morning. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "You were incredible yesterday," she said warmly. "But I think it's time you really show them what you can do. There's a regional music competition coming up. I want you to participate." The boy's eyes widened. A competition? The idea of performing in front of strangers, judges, and a bigger audience was both thrilling and terrifying. He had never imagined this. I don't know," he whispered. "What if I make a mistake?" "Then you will learn from it," the teacher replied gently. "Mistakes are part of music, part of life. What matters is that you try, that you show the world your heart through your music." Her words stayed with him. He spent the next few days preparing for the competition. He practiced tirelessly, more focused than ever. Every morning before school, every evening after homework, he returned to the piano. He worked on perfecting the pieces he planned to play, adding subtle touches of his own creativity. The music began to take on new life. It was no longer just notes on a page, it was an expression of everything he had felt, every challenge he had faced, and every small victory he had won along the way. At school, the students who had mocked him started looking at him differently. Some were curious, others cautious, and a few even a little envious. They had laughed at him, called him clumsy, and made fun of his quiet nature. But now they saw a boy who had something extraordinary, something they could not ignore. Despite the change in perception, the boy remained humble. He didn't boast or brag about the competition. He focused on his music, letting his fingers speak the words that his lips could not. Every practice session was a step closer to showing the world what he could truly do. Finally, the day of the regional competition arrived. The auditorium was larger than his school's, filled with bright lights, polished chairs, and an audience that seemed endless. Participants from different schools had come, some with professional training, some with talent similar to his. The boy felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach. The stage was intimidating, the crowd massive, and the judge's eyes sharp and focused. When it was his turn, he walked onto the stage quietly. The audience clapped politely, expecting another performance, perhaps good, but nothing extraordinary. The boy approached the piano, feeling the weight of the moment. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and let the music inside him come forward. The first notes were gentle, almost like a whisper. The audience leaned forward, curious. Then slowly the music began to grow. The melody flowed effortlessly, full of emotion, passion, and subtle power. The boy's fingers moved with precision, confidence, and grace. Each note seemed to tell a story, each chord carrying feelings of hope, struggle, and triumph. As he played, the audience was captivated. No one moved, no one whispered, no one laughed. The room was filled entirely with the sound of the piano and the emotion it carried. Teachers, judges, and students alike were mesmerized. They could see not only the skill but the soul behind the music. Some parts were delicate and soft, almost fragile, while others were powerful and bold, filling the auditorium with energy and intensity. He transitioned seamlessly between styles, improvising subtly yet beautifully. His music was no longer just notes, he had made it his own voice, a reflection of his journey, his struggles, and his quiet determination. For the first time, the boy felt fully seen. Not just noticed for a fleeting moment, but truly understood. The audience could feel every ounce of effort, every tear, every smile he had experienced along the way. And he felt a joy so profound that it made every hour of practice, every moment of ridicule, every late night spent alone at the piano, worth it. The climax of his performance was breathtaking. He combined melodies he had composed in secret with techniques he had learned over months of practice. The music swelled and then softened, rising and falling like waves. By the time the final note rang out, the audience sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what they had just heard. Then, the room erupted into applause. Cheering, clapping, and whistles filled the air. People were on their feet, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The boy opened his eyes, slightly overwhelmed, but a calm smile spread across his face. He had done it. He had not just played music, he had communicated something deeper than words ever could. The judges approached him, their faces showing admiration and awe. "That was extraordinary," one said. "You have talent beyond your years and a deep understanding of music that is rare." Another added, "Not only do you play beautifully, but you create with heart. That is what makes a true musician." Even some of the other participants, who had been confident and proud of their own abilities, came forward to congratulate him. They had witnessed something they could not deny. The boy who had once been mocked and laughed at had become the highlight of the competition. Backstage, the music teacher hugged him tightly. "I always knew you could do it," she said, smiling. "But even I am amazed at how far you've come. This is only the beginning. Remember, the music inside you will always guide you." The boy nodded, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and excitement. He realized that the journey had been long, filled with obstacles, ridicule, and doubts, but it had all led to this moment. The music had spoken louder than fear, louder than mockery, and louder than every doubt he had ever had about himself. That night, as he returned home, the applause and praise still echoed in his mind. He felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had ever experienced. For the first time, he understood the power of persistence, practice, and self-belief. He had transformed every ounce of doubt and ridicule into music, and in doing so, had changed not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. Over the next few days, news of his performance spread. Students and teachers at his school were in awe, and even families and friends in his community talked about the boy who had stunned everyone with his piano. Invitations to perform at small events began arriving, and people started to take notice of his extraordinary talent. Yet through all of this attention, he remained grounded. He continued to practice daily, not for applause, but for the love of music itself. Every note, every melody, and every song reminded him of where he had started, of the quiet moments alone at the piano, and of the determination that had carried him this far. he realized that the true reward was not the applause or recognition, but the ability to share something beautiful, to inspire others, and to express emotions that could not be spoken. Music had become his voice, his friend, and his path forward, and so, the boy who had once been laughed at, ignored, and mocked stood on the threshold of a new life. A life where his talent could shine, where his dedication and courage were recognized, and where the world had finally begun to see him for who he truly was, not a shy, awkward boy, but a young musician with the power to touch hearts, change minds, and inspire everyone who heard him play. That evening, as he played quietly by himself in the corner of his home, he smiled. The piano no longer felt like an instrument, it felt like a part of him. Each key, each note, and each melody was a reminder that he had overcome the odds, faced his fears, and turned mockery into music, and deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning. There were still more stages, more performances, and more melodies waiting to be discovered. But for now, he allowed himself to feel proud, content, and ready for the next chapter of his journey, a journey that had started in secrecy, shaped by challenges and fueled by a love for music that could never be silenced. After the regional competition, the boy's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The news of his extraordinary piano performance spread quickly. People from nearby schools and even local music clubs wanted to hear him play. His quiet life, once filled with secret practice sessions and unnoticed effort, was now full of invitations, applause, and admiration, yet despite the attention, he remained humble. He didn't seek fame, trophies, or recognition. What mattered to him was the music itself, the ability to share emotions through every note, and the joy of connecting with people in a way words could never express. Every time he sat at the piano, whether on stage or in the quiet corner of his home, he remembered the long hours he had spent learning, the laughter he had endured, and the secret moments that had shaped him. At school, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Students who once laughed and teased him now watched him with a mixture of awe and respect. Some approached him quietly to compliment his talent, while others asked for advice on practicing music. He noticed the change but did not let it affect him. He had learned long ago that true happiness did not come from the approval of others, but from the satisfaction of doing what he loved. His teachers, especially the music teacher who had guided him, were proud beyond words. She had always known he had potential, but seeing him grow into a performer who could touch hearts with his music filled her with deep pride. "You have worked so hard," she said one afternoon after a practice session, "and now everyone can see the result. But remember, this is only the beginning. Your journey has just started." The boy nodded quietly, understanding the truth in her words. There were bigger stages ahead, more complex compositions to master, and more opportunities to grow. He felt both excitement and nervousness, but he also felt ready. Every challenge he had faced, every laugh, every moment of doubt had prepared him for this moment. Soon, he was invited to perform at a citywide music event. It was a large hall with hundreds of people, some of whom were professional musicians, critics, and even music teachers from faraway schools. For the first time, he felt the weight of expectation. The audience was bigger, the stage brighter, and the pressure higher. But he also felt a quiet confidence. He knew that he had practiced, learned, and grown enough to face this challenge. When his turn came, he walked onto the stage with calm determination. The bright lights shone down, the audience waited in silence, and the piano seemed to hum in anticipation. He placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the music flow. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost like a whisper. But as he continued, the melody grew stronger, richer, and more expressive. Every note carried emotion, the joy of learning, the struggle of facing doubt, and the triumph of perseverance. The audience listened intently, completely captivated. They were witnessing not just a performance, but a story told through music. As he played, his fingers moved with confidence and precision, weaving together melodies he had created himself with techniques he had mastered over months of practice. The music was alive, full of depth and feeling, as if it had a soul of its own. Some parts were gentle and emotional, making listeners feel the fragility of life. Other parts were powerful and bold, commanding attention and filling the hall with energy. By the end of his performance, the audience was completely silent for a moment, absorbing the beauty of what they had heard. Then, as the last note faded, the hall erupted into applause. People stood, cheering, clapping, and even wiping tears from their eyes. The boy opened his eyes, slightly overwhelmed, but a quiet smile spread across his face. He had done it. He had not only played music, he had spoken through it, and everyone had listened. After the performance, he received recognition from teachers, critics, and musicians alike. They praised his talent, his dedication, and his ability to convey emotion through his music. Invitations for performances, scholarships, and mentorship opportunities began pouring in. Yet, through it all, he remained grounded, focused on the music itself rather than the accolades. Back at school, life had transformed. The students who had once mocked him now looked up to him. Some sought advice, asking how he had practiced or how he had stayed motivated despite the laughter and teasing. Others simply watched quietly, inspired by his dedication and success. The boy understood that his journey could motivate others, but he also knew that every person had their own path to follow. At home, he continued his daily practice. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a means of expressing his deepest thoughts and feelings. Even after the competitions and performances, he would often sit quietly, creating new melodies, experimenting with rhythm and harmony, and exploring the endless possibilities of sound. The music teacher continued to mentor him, offering guidance, encouragement, and wisdom. She taught him more about composition, theory, and the emotional depth of music. Each lesson brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow. The boy embraced every challenge, remembering that every obstacle he faced was part of the journey. Over time, the boy's talent became well known in his community and beyond. People spoke of the young musician who had turned ridicule into inspiration, who had transformed his quiet determination into breathtaking music. He had become a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the power of following one's passion. Despite the recognition and attention, he remained humble. He never forgot the laughter of his classmates, the doubt he had felt, or the hours he had spent alone at the piano. Those experiences had shaped him, teaching him resilience, patience, and the importance of believing in oneself even when others do not. He also began to inspire others, showing that hard work, dedication, and love for what you do could overcome even the harshest criticism. Younger students who struggled with self-confidence or who had been mocked for their talents began to see him as a role model. They realized that it was possible to rise above negativity, to pursue one's passion, and to succeed through perseverance and practice. The boy's journey was not just about becoming a talented pianist. It was about transformation. He had transformed himself from a shy, overlooked child into a confident, skilled musician. He had transformed the way others saw him, earning respect and admiration. And he had transformed doubt and ridicule into motivation, proving that the human spirit could triumph through determination and heart. With each performance, he continued to grow. He traveled to different cities for competitions, recitals, and workshops. He met other musicians, learned new techniques, and explored different styles of music. Each experience enriched his understanding, making his performances deeper, more expressive, and more impactful. Yet, through all the success and attention, he remained the same humble boy who had first touched the piano in secret. Shy and quiet, but full of curiosity and passion. He never let fame or recognition change him. He understood that the true value of music was not in applause, awards, or praise, but in the connection it created, the emotions it shared, and the inspiration it could spark in others. One day, after a long performance tour, he returned to his school auditorium. He sat quietly at the piano, the familiar keys beneath his fingers. He played softly, slowly, letting the music flow naturally. The notes carried memories of every step he had taken, the first awkward attempts, the secret practice sessions, the moments of doubt, and the victories of each performance. As he played, he realized something profound. His journey was not just about music, it was about courage, perseverance, and believing in oneself. It was about turning challenges into opportunities, mockery into motivation, and passion into a gift that could touch lives. The piano had been his teacher, his friend, and his guide, and it had shown him the power of determination and heart. The boy who had once been mocked, laughed at, and underestimated had become more than a talented musician. He had become an inspiration, a symbol of hope, and a living example that greatness often comes quietly, hidden beneath patience, practice, and belief in oneself. And as he finished his music, letting the last note linger in the air, he smiled. He had come a long way from the shy boy who had first touched the piano, unsure and timid. He had faced fear, ridicule, and doubt and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. The applause he once longed for had been replaced by something greater: confidence, fulfillment, and the knowledge that he had discovered his true path. From that day forward, he continued to play, to learn, and to inspire. Every note he struck, every melody he created, and every performance he gave was a testament to his journey, a journey that began with mockery, grew through determination, and culminated in the brilliance of his piano mastery. The boy had proven, in the most beautiful way possible, that no matter how many times the world laughs at you, no matter how small or unnoticed you feel, perseverance, passion, and belief in oneself can turn every challenge into an opportunity and every note into magic.